The sterile air in the spare room felt colder than outside. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light slicing through a gap in the cheap blinds. My fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from what they held. A small, embossed card, the kind you get from a luxury building. Not ours. The address on it swam into focus, the Pinnacle, Penthouse suite. A name was scrawled lightly on the back. Not mine. A woman's name. An unfamiliar woman's name. My husband's name wasn't on the card. Not directly. But it had fallen from a folder only he used, tucked away in a box of old business papers in the spare room closet. Papers I'd never touched, never needed to touch. Until now. The air caught in my throat. It wasn't just the card. It was the weight of it, the implication of height, of exclusivity, of a life lived elsewhere, secret, high above the street-level reality I shared with him. My world tilted, silent and slow, like a skyscraper beginning to lean before the crash. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. We had a good life. A life built brick by careful brick over 15 years. A comfortable house in a tree-lined suburb, the kind with good schools and neighbors who waved. Dinners at the polished mahogany table, the predictable rhythm of his work trips and my book club meetings, the shared laughter over silly things. He was Mark. Solid. Reliable. Charming when he wanted to be. A successful businessman. We weren't wealthy by penthouse standards, not overtly, but we were secure. Our ambitions felt aligned, comfortable retirement, maybe some travel, a future we mapped out on quiet evenings. I saw him as my partner, my anchor. I trusted him implicitly. That feels naive now, a word that tastes like ash on my tongue. My life was a beautifully arranged display window, and I was the proud shopkeeper, unaware the goods inside were worthless fakes, held up by invisible strings pulled by a hand I thought was holding mine. Our house felt like a sanctuary, built on shared history, shared dreams. Every picture on the wall, every piece of furniture chosen together, felt like a testament to something real, something solid. The scent of his coffee in the morning, the sound of his key in the lock at night, these were the comforting anchors of my existence. I never questioned them. Why would I? There was no reason. He was attentive, if sometimes preoccupied. He remembered anniversaries. He listened when I spoke, or at least I thought he did. We talked about the future, about aging together, about the quiet pleasures of a life well lived. We talked about renovating the kitchen someday, about planting roses in the backyard. Small things, ordinary things, the fabric of a normal life. It was ordinary in the best possible way. It was safe. It was mine. Or so I believed. Looking back, maybe there were tiny cracks I chose not to see. A certain distance in his eyes sometimes, a phone he guarded a little too closely, late nights at the office that stretched later than usual. But I attributed it to stress, to the pressures of his job. He was building something, he said, working towards something big. I was proud of his drive. I admired his ambition. I thought his ambition was for us. The thought of another woman, another life, existing parallel to mine, funded by the very security I felt, was not just a betrayal, it was an impossibility. It was a glitch in the matrix, a fundamental error in the code of my reality. The error code began with a utility bill, not ours. An old one, for an address I didn't recognize. It was tucked inside that same folder of business papers, overlooked, probably meant for shredding. It was for a unit number, a different building than the one on the card. My mind, still processing the shock of the card, tried to rationalize. An old office? A storage unit? But the dates were recent, very recent, and the energy usage was high for a storage unit, high for a vacant office. I felt a prickle of unease, a tiny stone dropped into the still water of my certainty. It wasn't proof of anything, not really. Just odd. Mark traveled. Maybe it was something for a client? A temporary space? But the name on the card, the woman's name, it clawed at me. It didn't fit any narrative that included me. The uneasy feeling didn't dissipate. It settled in my stomach, a cold, heavy stone. I started looking. Not actively searching, not at first. More like noticing. Noticing the way his phone's screen angled away from me. Noticing the hushed tones on calls he took outside. Noticing the new, expensive watch he wore, the one he said was a bonus, but didn't have a gift receipt from his company. The utility bill and the card pulsed in my mind, disconnected facts searching for a pattern. I felt like a detective in my own life, and the suspect was the man who slept beside me. It was a horrifying, lonely feeling. I started staying up late after he fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations, searching for hidden meanings, for signs I'd missed. Every interaction became suspect. Every casual remark felt loaded. I felt like I was going insane. The house, my sanctuary, began to feel like a stage. The small clues multiplied, insidious and relentless. A charge for a high-end restaurant in a city he claimed to have been visiting for a different reason. A text message preview on his lock screen, quickly dismissed, but the first few words lingered. "Can't wait for," followed by an emoji I didn't recognize him using. Receipts for flower deliveries to an address that wasn't mine, wasn't his office, wasn't anyone we knew. Each piece was small, easily dismissed on its own, but together they started to form a grotesque mosaic. The woman's name from the card started appearing in subtle ways. A coffee shop loyalty card with her name on it, tucked into his wallet among his own cards. A dry cleaning tag with her initials. He was sloppy, or perhaps just arrogant, used to me not looking, not questioning. And then I found it. Not the lease immediately, but something that led me directly there. A property tax statement. Mailed to our house. For an address I didn't own. The Pinnacle, Penthouse suite. The same address as the card. But the tax statement was in his name. Or, not exactly his name. The name of a shell company. A limited liability company I'd never heard of, registered at a P.O. box downtown. But the tax bill payment came from an account he controlled. The paper felt heavy in my hands, heavier than any stone. This wasn't a rental. This was ownership. Or, at least, long-term lease disguised as ownership through a corporate veil. This was investment. This was serious. This was his hidden life, concrete and real, documented by the county tax assessor. The air left my lungs in a rush. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't sneaking around in cheap motels or borrowed apartments. This was a carefully constructed, high-dollar secret life. A penthouse. A penthouse. The sheer audacity of it. While I was clipping coupons and debating paint colors for the living room, he was funding a luxury nest in the sky for another woman. The woman's name from the card, the name on the loyalty program, she was living there. In a place paid for with money, I thought was building our future. The betrayal twisted into something colder, sharper. It wasn't just emotional infidelity, it was financial treachery. He wasn't just cheating, he was stealing. Stealing our shared security, our planned future, and pouring it into a gilded cage for someone else. The thought of that penthouse, sparkling high above the city lights, filled me with a bitter, consuming rage. It represented everything he had stolen, not just loyalty, but a sense of partnership, of shared destiny. It was a monument to his deceit, funded by the very foundation of our life together. Disbelief curdled into a cold, hard certainty. The pieces fit now, sickeningly. The late nights, the guarded phone, the vague explanations, the sudden bursts of travel that seemed slightly off. He wasn't just having an affair, he was maintaining an entire parallel existence. And it was expensive. The tax statement gave me a glimpse into the value of that penthouse. It wasn't cheap. He was diverting significant funds to this secret life. Funds that should have been ours. Our retirement savings, our investment plans, all of it suddenly felt compromised, potentially plundered. The anger that had been a hot, volatile thing started to cool, solidifying into something much more dangerous. Determination. Confronting him felt pointless. He would lie. He would deny. He would twist things. And even if he admitted it, what would that solve? A messy divorce? Dividing assets he had already siphoned off? I didn't want to just end the marriage. I wanted justice. I wanted him to feel the same crushing loss, the same fundamental violation of trust and security that I felt. I wanted him to lose what he valued most.
And it was a me.
It was his money, his status, his carefully constructed world of deceit. The knowledge of the penthouse, of the shell company, of the tax statement in his name, or its name, became my secret weapon. I started digging deeper, more deliberately. I needed to understand how he was funding this. How was he paying for a luxury penthouse without me noticing? How was he hiding this level of expense? Accessing his business files became easier than I expected. He was still arrogant, still confident in his secrecy. I found more documentation related to the LLC, bank statements for accounts linked to it, transfers from his main business account into these hidden ones. It wasn't just personal funds he was using. He was funneling money through his business. And that's when I started seeing the red flags. Expenses that didn't make sense, inflated invoices, payments to companies that seemed to exist only on paper. It wasn't just using business funds for personal use. It looked like deliberate obfuscation, potentially fraudulent write-offs, maybe even outright tax evasion disguised as business expenses related to the Phantom LLC. The deeper I went, the dirtier it got. The penthouse wasn't just a love nest. It was potentially the hub of financial wrongdoing. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was potentially defrauding the government. Living with him during this time was an exercise in psychological endurance. I smiled. I cooked dinner. I listened to him talk about his day, knowing that his day likely involved seeing her, spending money on her, living a life I was now meticulously dismantling from the shadows. Every touch felt like a violation. Every shared meal felt like a lie. The house felt suffocating, filled with the ghosts of a marriage that was already dead, but hadn't yet been buried. I moved through the days like a ghost myself, observing, gathering information, feeling nothing but a cold, focused resolve. The emotional pain was a constant, low thrum beneath the surface, but the anger was the engine now, quiet and powerful. I made copies of everything. Every relevant document. Every cryptic email. Every suspicious transaction record. I started organizing it, creating a timeline, a clear picture of the flow of money from his legitimate business to the shell company, and then, presumably, to pay for the penthouse expenses and whatever else he funded for his mistress. It was like building a case, piece by agonizing piece. The risk was immense. If he found out I was looking, found out I knew, found out I was gathering evidence, I didn't know what he would do. He had shown a capacity for elaborate deceit I hadn't imagined. What else was he capable of? The fear was a bitter counterpoint to the anger, a constant reminder of the tightrope I was walking. But the image of that penthouse, that symbol of his betrayal and arrogance, fueled me. I wouldn't just walk away. I would burn down the gilded cage and make sure he was caught in the fire. The scale of his deception solidified my resolve. This wasn't a one-time mistake, a moment of weakness. This was a planned, long-term, financially significant investment in a separate life. It wasn't just a penthouse. It was a declaration of independence from our shared reality, funded by the very resources I helped build and protect. The tax implications of his scheme became clearer with each document I copied. He wasn't just hiding assets. He was likely claiming false business expenses to offset the costs associated with the penthouse and the shell company. That crossed a line. That wasn't just personal betrayal. That was a crime. A crime that carried real consequences. Consequences far more severe than a messy divorce. This was his Achilles heel. He was so focused on hiding the affair from me, he got sloppy with the finances, arrogant enough to think no one would ever look closely at his business records or the intricate web of accounts he'd created. He underestimated me. He assumed my world revolved around him, that my biggest concern was his affection, not the integrity of our financial lives. He thought I was weak, easily deceived, focused only on domestic trivialities. He was wrong. The turning point came one sleepless night, sitting alone in the living room, surrounded by photocopies and financial statements spread across the coffee table. The city lights twinkled outside, and I imagined that penthouse, high above, bathed in the same indifferent light. The thought of him and her up there, comfortable and oblivious in their stolen luxury, while I sat in the ruins of my life, was unbearable. I had to act.
But how?
Going to him would be useless. Going to a divorce lawyer felt inadequate. It would untangle our lives, but it wouldn't deliver justice for the depth of his betrayal and the calculated financial deceit. That's when the tax fraud angle sharpened into focus. The government had resources I didn't. They had teeth. They could investigate his business, his accounts, his shell company. They could trace the money. And if he was guilty of serious tax evasion or fraud related to funding that penthouse, the consequences would be severe. Far more severe than anything I could achieve through a divorce court. He could face massive fines, asset forfeiture, even prison time. That would hit him where it hurt the most: his wallet, his freedom, his public image as a successful, upstanding businessman. The decision solidified. I wouldn't confront him about the affair. I wouldn't even threaten divorce. I would let him continue in his arrogance, in his belief that he had pulled off the perfect deception. And I would quietly, methodically, expose the financial crime he had committed to facilitate that deception. It was a cold, calculated decision, devoid of the heat of anger or the ache of sorrow. It was about strategic dismantling. It was about using the structure he had built for his lies to bring him down. It was about reclaiming my power by hitting him in the one place he was vulnerable, the one place he thought he was untouchable. His money. His business. The source of the very luxury he used to betray me. The path was risky, complex. I had to be careful not to expose myself, to make sure the information landed in the right hands, in a way that would trigger a full investigation without leading back to me prematurely. It required patience, precision, and a level of detachment I hadn't known I possessed. But the image of that penthouse, that monument to his lies, was a constant reminder of what was at stake. It had to fall, and I would be the one to bring it down. The execution of the plan required meticulous care. I couldn't just walk into the IRS office with a stack of papers. I needed to present the information in a way that was credible, compelling, and pointed directly at the potential tax fraud linked to the penthouse. I spent weeks refining the summary, cross-referencing documents, creating a clear, concise narrative of the money flow from his legitimate business through the shell company and the suspicious expenses and asset acquisitions. I consulted discreetly with a forensic accountant I knew through a friend, framing it as a hypothetical case study. They confirmed my suspicions. This looked like a classic case of using a shell company for illegitimate tax purposes and asset concealment. They gave me advice on the best way to present the information to get the attention of the right department. It wasn't about telling a story of infidelity. It was about presenting evidence of financial crime. Names, dates, account numbers, transactions. Hard facts. I chose my moment carefully. I found a secure way to package the information, ensuring no digital footprint led back to me. I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested, using A.P.O. box, not my address, addressed to a specific unit within the IRS known for handling complex fraud cases. Then I waited. The waiting was excruciating. Every day was a performance, pretending everything was normal, going through the motions of our life, while a fuse I had lit was slowly burning towards an explosive destination. He was oblivious. He talked about work, about his travel plans, maybe even unknowingly mentioned things happening at that place without me flinching. My poker face was perfect. The fear was still there, a knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, cold anticipation. I imagined the package arriving, being opened, the eyes scanning the documents, the slow dawning realization on the part of the investigators that they had a significant case on their hands. I pictured them following the trail of money, confirming every suspicious transaction, every fraudulent write-off. I pictured them finding the documentation for the penthouse, linking it directly to the questionable funds. Days turned into weeks. Life with Mark continued its predictable rhythm, a surreal dance of normalcy. He seemed relaxed, confident. Too confident. He had no idea the storm that was gathering on his horizon, a storm I had orchestrated. The silence from the authorities was unnerving, but I knew these investigations took time. They would build their case methodically, quietly. I had done everything I could. The fuse was burning. I just had to wait for the explosion. The thought of him sitting up there in that penthouse, enjoying his secret life, oblivious to the legal and financial net tightening around him, gave me a grim satisfaction. Every expensive dinner he paid for, every luxurious gift he bought her, every night he spent away from our home was a nail in the coffin of his own making. And I had just provided the hammer.
The call didn't come to me.
It came to him. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen, making coffee. He was in his home office, getting ready for a call. I heard his phone ring. His voice was normal at first, a standard business greeting.
Then the change.
A sharp inhale. A strained, "Yes, this is he," a pause. His voice rose, a note of disbelief creeping in. "Asset forfeiture?"
What are you talking about?
Another pause, longer this time. I stood frozen in the kitchen, the coffee maker dripping into the pot, the sound unnervingly loud in the sudden silence of the house. Then, the voice on his end must have said something that shattered his composure completely. He screamed. It wasn't a shout of anger. It was a raw, animal sound of pure, blindsided panic and rage. "The Pinnacle? The Penthouse? You can't do that." "On what grounds?" "Tax fraud." "What tax fraud?" His voice cracked. He was yelling into the phone now, pacing the office. I could hear it from the kitchen. "That's impossible. Those are legitimate business expenses."
Who reported this?
Who the hell would report this? He was frantic, unraveling. The penthouse. They knew about the penthouse. And they were seizing it, not because of the mistress, not because it was a love nest, but because of tax fraud. The funding of it. The very thing I had exposed. He hadn't anticipated this. He had prepared for a confrontation about infidelity, maybe a financial negotiation and a divorce. But he hadn't prepared for the government stepping in, seizing his hidden assets, investigating his business practices. He hadn't prepared for losing the very thing he had used to flaunt his secret life. The foundation of his deceit was crumbling, seized by federal authorities. The scream tore through the quiet house, a sound of utter devastation, of a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse around him. He didn't scream her name. He screamed the name of the building. He screamed about the tax fraud. He screamed because he had been blindsided, his secret weapon turned into his undoing. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of legal chaos for him. The initial asset seizure was just the beginning. The tax investigation expanded, looking deeper into his business finances, the shell company, the flow of funds. Lawyers were involved. Documents were subpoenaed. His initial panic gave way to a cold fury directed at me, once he pieced together that I must have been the one who knew, the one who found the information, the one who sent it. He never admitted the affair directly in his tirades, not really. It was always about the money, the business, the injustice of the investigation, the audacity of me interfering. He called me names. He threatened me. He tried to bluff, to intimidate. But I was no longer the woman who had been easily deceived. I was the woman who had brought down his penthouse with a stack of paper and a cold strategy. His threats felt hollow. His anger, pathetic. He was a cornered animal, lashing out. The divorce proceedings were swift, relatively clean on my end, thanks to his overwhelming legal problems on the financial front. The assets he had hidden, the money he had funneled, were now potentially subject to government forfeiture or needed for his legal defense. His focus was entirely on saving himself from prison and financial ruin. The affair, the mistress, the penthouse as a love nest, it all became secondary to the much larger problem he faced. The mistress, I heard, was quickly removed from the penthouse by the authorities. She wasn't an owner, just a resident. She lost her gilded cage. I never saw her, never spoke to her. She was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was his deceit, his arrogance, his belief that he was above consequence. I watched from a distance as his life imploded. His business suffered under the scrutiny. His reputation was tarnished. The legal battles dragged on, costly and draining. The penthouse, that gleaming symbol of his betrayal, was no longer his. It stood there, high above the city, a shell, a monument to a secret life that had been exposed and dismantled, not by emotional confrontation, but by the cold, hard hand of financial law. There was no triumphant feeling, not really. Just a deep, weary sense of closure. He got what he deserved, not for hurting me emotionally, but for the calculated crime he committed. He lost what he valued most. My life is quieter now. The house feels empty, but also lighter, free from the weight of his lies. The future we planned together is gone, replaced by an unknown path I have to forge on my own. There's a sadness that lingers, a scar from the betrayal, a mourning for the life I thought I had. But there's also a quiet strength, a sense of having navigated a storm I never saw coming and emerging, perhaps not unscathed, but standing. I learned that trust, once broken, cannot be repaired. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't loud or dramatic, but quiet, strategic, and aimed precisely at the enemy's greatest vulnerability. He thought his money and his secrets made him invincible. He was wrong. The papers, the numbers, the cold, hard facts of financial fraud, they were more powerful than any emotional confrontation could ever be. He built a gilded cage, and I helped the government take it back. And in doing so, I finally, irrevocably, broke free from him. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version in the comments. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.